Welcome to the Climate Trends podcast. Today, we dive into the pivotal outcomes of COP29, held in the vibrant city of Baku, Azerbaijan.
That's right. For 2 intense weeks, the world's leaders, negotiators, and climate advocates were hard at work tackling some of the toughest challenges on the global agenda.
2024, no surprise here, is on track to be the hottest year on record. And amid this climate crisis, rich nations like the US and Japan are tightening their purse strings, while fossil fuel heavy countries like Saudi Arabia have been steering the pot, trying to fracture global climate unity.
And that's left the world's most vulnerable in a tough spot. But despite those headwinds and a chaotic process, a deal was done. For a meeting dubbed the Finance COP, rich countries brought a position perceived as shortchanging the poorest and the most vulnerable, and focused almost completely on shifting responsibility to other growing economies.
The lack of trust between rich and poor countries that has been aggravated by war and the COVID crisis was evident. But developing countries worked together with partners in the global north to set a guiding star for the realignment of the global financial system to tackle climate change. This was represented by a US dollar 1.3 trillion goal in 2035.
So, what did Baku really achieve? And what hurdles still stand in our way as we gear up for COP30 in Brazil? Let's take a closer look at what was decided at COP29 to shape the future of climate action.
Developed countries for the first time agreed to a sum of US dollar 300 billion a year by 2035. While these numbers do not represent a major change in spending or increase in spending, they show long-term commitment to partnership that will achieve global climate action.
It's important to remember that the $300 billion a year proposed is to be achieved by 2035. That's 10 years from today. Even the $100 billion goal was only achieved once in 2022, despite being adopted in 2009. Also, there is little clarity on whether the $300 billion includes public and private financing or how it will be dispersed. The developing countries must reconvene at COP30 and seek to understand the details of this offer and insist that the global north commit a lot more money in the form of grants. If energy subsidies alone can amount to several $1 trillion every year, the global north would do well to channelize some of that funding towards building sustainability and climate resilience in the south.
Another noteworthy deal at COP29 was the government-to-government carbon markets that was agreed upon. Experts remain wary of this agreement, with some labeling Article 6.2 as dangerously loose and opaque.
Meanwhile, the adoption of Article 6.4 rules on removals risk repeating the inadequate measures of the voluntary carbon market that guarantee
Looking at
permanence.
other important aspects of climate action, adaptation finance received a much-needed boost, with flows from the Adaptation Fund tripled. This funding, primarily public and grant-based, aims to support most vulnerable countries, including least developed countries and small island developing states.
While this increase is a positive step, the actual implementation and accessibility of these funds will be crucial in determining their impact.
Loss and damage financing, critical for countries already bearing the brunt of climate impacts, was also acknowledged as a key area requiring support.
However, specific allocations were not finalized, which left many vulnerable nations dissatisfied with the lack of concrete commitments.
To ensure accountability and progress towards the US dollar 1.3 trillion target, COP29 introduced the Baku to Belém roadmap. This mechanism will periodically review financial commitments with reports expected in 2026 and 2027. The roadmap also includes plans to reassess and potentially revise the targets by 2030, providing a framework for course correction if needed.
One of the more controversial outcomes was the encouragement of voluntary contributions from developing nations under the guise of South-South cooperation. Many countries, including Kenya and other representatives of the African group, rejected this approach, arguing that it distorts the equity principles of the Paris Agreement and unfairly shifts responsibility to the nations that are the least equipped to bear it.
The outcomes of COP29 send a powerful signal reinforcing the momentum already evident in stock markets, boardrooms, and government policies worldwide. Investments in clean energy have surged, growing at twice the rate of fossil fuels. Solar PV investments now outpace all other energy generation technologies, signaling a shift in global energy priorities. The International Energy Agency projects that demand for fossil fuels will peak by 2030, further underscoring the need for a rapid transition to renewable energy sources.
Despite these positive developments, COP29 faced significant pushback from fossil fuel interest groups. Their attempts to derail progress were met with firm resistance, as negotiators reaffirmed commitments to phasing out fossil fuels. The extent to which this commitment will translate into tangible action will be tested in the national climate action plans that are due in 2025. So now, what's next?
Well, as the dust settles, the focus now shifts to Brazil for COP30, dubbed as the turnaround COP by Brazilian President Lula. The path forward requires addressing the persistent gaps left by Baku. Emissions are still rising, extreme weather events are escalating, and the financial needs of the vulnerable nations remain unmet.
While COP29 didn't satisfy everyone, it kept the spirit of multilateralism alive. As Simon Steele, UNFCCC Executive Secretary, aptly said, this deal is an insurance policy for humanity. But like any insurance policy, it only works if the premiums are paid in full and on time. No country got everything they wanted, and we leave Baku with a mountain of work still to do.
Well said. The road to Belém will demand greater ambition, trust, and collaboration. Stay tuned as we continue to track these developments and their impact on our shared future. Thanks for listening to the Climate Trends podcast.